everybody, and welcome to Alan History Nerd. In this video I'm looking at US politics. I'm looking at interpretations and debates around Congress. So this is finishing off our Congress section, and a lot of the stuff in here goes back to and connects to some of the earlier videos that I've done on Congress. So this in the A-level specification at Excel is 2.3, interpretations and debates around Congress, out of component 3 on US government and politics. So there's 3 bullet points in here: changing roles and powers of Congress and their relative importance, and the debate about adequacy of its representative role. There's then another one on changing significance of parties in Congress and significance and effectiveness of powers outlined in the Constitution. So I'm going to do some assessment of all these different bits as we go through. Again, this is part of my series in which I'm trying to cover all the different bits of the specification, like these ones above. And please make sure you are subscribed so you get notifications that I add more stuff. And it should hopefully be the case in the not too distant future that I have the entire specification on this channel. So, changing roles and powers of Congress and their relative importance. Well, very much of this depends on the balance between the parties within Congress itself, and then also on who's in the White House. So if you've got both houses dominated by one party and the president of the same party, then the role of Congress changes. Whilst if you've got a president from one party, like we've had recently with Trump from the Republicans, and one of the houses controlled by the other party, so for example the House has been controlled by the Democrats, then Congress plays an increasingly important role, because they can stop the president from doing what they want in a lot of circumstances. Now, as American politics has developed, and there's been far more influence, far more emphasis on foreign policy and military action, this arguably reduces the role of Congress, because despite the Military Powers Act of 1973, really, Congress doesn't have the degree of oversight or power when it comes to these areas that it does on domestic policies. So as they become a more important part of American politics, then the role of Congress arguably diminishes. The nationalisation of midterm elections quite clearly has increased the relative importance of Congress, because we've seen these big national campaigns leading to a clear mandate. So, for example, the House speakers over time have made a big thing with this. So the most important or most well known one of these was the Contract of America, that was driven by the Republican House Speaker Newt Gingrich in 1994, and this pushed conservative economic policy, and that gave them a really strong mandate for pushing things through and getting legislation passed. In 2006, Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat House Speaker, pushed through the 100-hour agenda, which many Democrat members of the House ran on, and this very ambitious 6-day program, including increasing minimum wage, halving interest rates on students' loans, they will learn a load of success of turning this into law. So this shows Congress taking a greater level of importance in comparison to the presidency, and the midterms are a big part of this, particularly in these examples where a party has run on a mid-term kind of national campaign. It gives them a mandate, means they can get stuff done. It's very difficult for a president to stand in the way of some of this if it's just been overwhelmingly voted for by the American population, particularly if 2 years later the president wants to get re-elected. So there are lots of debates about the adequacy of Congress's representative role, and I've done another video on the functions of Congress, and one of those ones that I did was on representation. So to look at this one in detail, I would suggest you go to that video. Essentially, Congress isn't very representative, so it doesn't look like the American people, and particularly, for example, there's a massive underrepresentation of women. Now, there is some degree of debate over the significance of this and how important it is, and that a lot of that comes down to a couple of models of representation, the delegate and trustee models, and if you're going on the delegate model, it doesn't matter as much, and the idea is that works more in the House than it does in the Senate. If you're on the trustee model, then arguably it really does matter, because the experiences of the people in Congress are not going to be similar to the experiences of a lot of people in the American society, and therefore you're not going to get great representation. Another thing to say about the adequacy of his representative role is actually, if you ask the American people, they generally don't think they're doing a very good job, and there's a whole range of quite entertaining public surveys on this, which and opinion polls just suggest that, for example, congressmen are about as popular, but not quite as popular as things like cockroaches. So that seems to really strongly suggest they aren't doing their representative role very well. But there is always balance, and there's always argument on these things. Incumbents have about a 90% chance of being re-elected. Now, if again, I should just go back to the video, there's some very dodgy reasons why that is the case, but that would seem to suggest quite overwhelmingly that the American people do think incumbent members of Congress are doing a good job, because otherwise, why do they keep re-electing them? The House has very frequent elections every 2 years, which complements the longer 6-year terms of senators. So that can be argued is a really good balance in terms of the representative role, having the two houses that they do a slightly different job, and they are elected over longer and shorter terms. Separation of powers also kind of means there's a greater increase in voter choice, because you can split your ticket. So you can vote for a president of one party, you can vote for a member of the House or a member of the Senate from a different one, to try and give that balance. You also, because of the frequent elections in the House, you get that mid-term chance to, if you don't think the president's doing a very good job, of stopping them in their way and just kind of going, right, actually we're going to vote for the other party in the House, and then we're just going to block the president from doing what they want. And we've seen that under both the most recent presidents. It happened to Trump, it happened also to Obama. So all of this suggests at the bottom, the back end of this suggests they're doing a really good representative role. The stuff at the top suggests they aren't. So again, there is a real debate in that one, and that would be a potential one for an essay, I think. Again, this is another area which could be assessed, the changing significance of parties in Congress. Well, there definitely has been a shift. Partisanship and party unity are both far stronger today than they ever have been in the past. Now, often we talk about the fact that American party discipline and party unity is much, much weaker than, for example, what we see in the UK. But this seems to be changing, and it seems to be becoming more partisan, more in line with what we're used to in the UK. This has really been highlighted in recent time by the refusal of the majority of Republicans in Congress to contradict Trump's outlandish claims about voter fraud over the 6 weeks following the election, his loss of the election, which he hasn't accepted. And we've seen Congress going along with him, or the Republicans in Congress going along with him, and this seems to be partly because they're worried about the damage he could do to their careers, and partly because they're worried about the damage going against him could do to the runoff race in Georgia. But it does suggest this high level of partisanship, where he's Republican and they're with him, so they're with him, and the only ones we've really seen speak out with him, they're the ones who have been speaking out against him all along. And then we've seen a number of Republicans who've spoken out, but the ones who have spoken out have tended to be ones who are coming to the end of their terms and therefore don't have anything to lose. And so, for example, we've seen respected members of the party essentially resigning, but they're resigning with only a matter of weeks left in Congress. So this is going to have an impact on the way Congress runs, and there definitely is a change in the significance of party affiliation. There seems to be very little ideological middle ground in Congress, with many Democrats becoming increasingly progressive and liberal, whilst Republicans are becoming increasingly conservative. So party unity scores, which are a way of measuring how members of Congress vote and whether they sit in line with the party whip and the general direction the party is voting. Now, if we go back to 1969, 1970, then you've got a party unity score of about 70, whilst in 2011, 2012, it was over 90. And these kind of scores have continued. And now this does have big impact in Congress, particularly when you've got different parties controlling different houses. So we see increasingly confrontational politics in Congress, and this becomes again increasingly significant because to get things passed, particularly in the situation that we had, so in the last 2 years, we've had Trump in the White House, we've had the Democrats controlling the House, and we've had the Republicans controlling the Senate. Now, in those circumstances, you need compromise and bipartisan approaches to pass any kind of legislation. It's just not happened. It's been quite the opposite. It's been highly partisan, and therefore what we've seen is all the bills getting blocked in the House, a failure to meet a compromise with the Senate. So therefore we are seeing significantly less legislation in recent Congresses that any of the times we've seen in the past. So for example, about 4 years ago, it was about 50% less than it had been in 03, 06, and those numbers are continuing to go down. Trump has struggled to get really anything through, and so the numbers are dropping on this. There's also increasing inconsistency in terms of the position Congress is taking up on things, depending again on partisan lines. So we see this particularly with whoever's in the White House compared to who controls the Senate. So we've had the Senate controlled by the Republicans for a period of time now. So they confirmed Trump's most recent nomination to the Supreme Court only a matter of weeks before the election, which he went on to lose. Compared to the Senate, which was a Republican Senate, refusing to allow Obama to appoint to the Supreme Court at all in the final year of his time in office. So there's a definite double standard there, which doesn't reflect well on Congress, but it also shows a massive increase in the significance of party, because that is a partisan decision. It's not you just don't make appointments to the Supreme Court in the last year of a term. It's you can appoint to the Supreme Court in the last year of your term, as long as you're in the same party as the party that controls the Senate. So a clear sign of greater partisanship. The net result of this increasing partisanship is gridlock. So high levels of partisanship plus a divided government, so where not all three parts in terms of the executive and both bits of the legislature are controlled by the same party, leads to gridlock in the American system. And gridlock is when things essentially don't get done because one or other part blocks the other two. And this has been seen at the moment as I make this video. There is currently a huge difficulty getting a stimulus package to help those who have been really badly economically affected by the COVID crisis. Now, there's general agreement, actually, in basic principle, that there's a need for economic stimulus to help those who have been economically badly hit by the COVID crisis. But because the difference ideologically between the parties, because of this growing partisanship, they seem to be finding it really difficult to work together. We have seen an example, however, where this hasn't been the case. So there was the Defence Act that recently passed, which it passed with overwhelming majorities by partisan support. Trump said he's going to veto it. That veto is likely to get overturned. Earlier in Trump's term in office, we saw federal government shut down for a record 35 days, the longest in US history. Obama had seen a shutdown for a significant number of days as well. So these again show us the increasing role of partisanship and show us one of its impacts, and a very negative impact. Now we end up in a slightly weird place in terms of bits of legislation with all this as well. So Obama faced huge opposition with the Affordable Care Act, and bits of it got knocked down and things like that. Trump has then failed to repeal it. So we've had one president not quite get everything he wants in terms of bringing some legislation in, and another president who's run on the idea that it's a terrible piece of legislation and it should be scrapped, failing to actually scrap it. So we're left in a kind of a halfway house. We're left with everything unresolved. And again, this is showing the parties having partisanship having a significant impact in the function of Congress. Gridlock in Congress leads to presidents relying on executive orders and therefore kind of bypassing or going around Congress, and this reduces Congress's role. So in the increased partisanship and with the failure to find bipartisan agreement and to get actual bills passed and turned into acts, Congress ultimately could be reducing its own role, because if a president ultimately is going to give up and go, well, I can't get it through Congress, so I'm going to have to use different routes. I'll use executive orders. And we've seen actually with a president kind of blinds Congress with loads and loads and loads of executive orders in a short period of time. It's very difficult for Congress then to go back and unpick it all. And here we're seeing Congress's role being reduced. Now, will Biden be more successful in offering strong leadership and also being willing to compromise in terms of actually getting things through Congress? Time will tell on that. But with many Republicans refusing to even to acknowledge electoral victory and the runoffs in Georgia still being left and being hugely significant, you've got to say his chances are going to be limited. Now, the world may change. The partisanship may die down once Trump's not around, or once Trump isn't present, but there's definitely going to be big demands from the progressive liberal wing of the Democrat Party, who did a huge amount in terms of getting the vote out to make sure Biden got this record-breaking number of votes, and they're going to want to see some of the stuff that they believe in, and it's going to be very hard for Biden to get that through, and what impact that will have in Congress on those progressive liberal members when they're going, right, we want this, and they've got a president who can't deliver it because of the situation in Congress, some of which will depend on whether the Democrats can pick up both seats in the runoff in Georgia. Significance and effectiveness of powers outlined in the Constitution. Well, there are lots of powers outlined in the Constitution. I'm going to talk about a lot of them very briefly. So they have all legislative powers as given to them in Article 1 of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 is known as the Elastic Clause. Congress can pass all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying out execution of foregoing powers. So this essentially has allowed Congress to expand its power over time, because anything that's not specified to them is supposed to fall to the states. But if they kind of go, well, we need to make laws on this because it impacts on the ability to make laws on that, which the Constitution says we can. And so we've seen a growth of federal government through American history, and a growth of congressional power through history, largely based on this elastic clause. The House of Representatives has a special power in the fact that all finance bills raising revenue have to start with the House, and the power of the purse held jointly by the House and the Senate is a really important one in terms of controlling what happens with American government, because the executive can't do anything without money. And that is really important position, and it does make Congress an effective block on the executive, and that's part of oversight. And again, if you want to see more on oversight, I suggest you visit my video with the link highlighted there. Now, more on this. The powers that Congress has it involves the ability to override a president's veto. They need 2/3 in both houses to do that. It was used once on Obama, the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. It is likely to happen, if there's time, to Trump over a recent Defense Act right near the end of his term in office. Congress plays a very important role. The Senate plays a very important role, to be more precise, in confirming appointments to the Supreme Court and to the Cabinet and various other places, and this has been particularly important, as I've already mentioned in this video, in terms of the Supreme Court, and we've seen a difference in the treatment of Obama and Trump. It has a check on presidential power when it comes to ratifying treaties, and comes to big treaties, the president generally has to keep the Senate informed, because there's no point him signing a treaty if the Senate is just going to reject it. And Congress has a joint power in initiating constitutional amendments. This is a very, very significant power, but the other side of that it's really hard to do, and if you have to get it through 3/4 of the states, and we've seen a great number of attempted amendments fail because you can't get 2/3 in both houses, or you can't get 3/4 of the state. So we've only had 27 amendments. 10 of those are the Bill of Rights. So it is a great power, but it is hugely limited in terms of how frequently it can be effectively used. The power of impeachment is a really important one. It was used against Trump, but he survived due to the Republican dominance in the Senate. And it's possible to see the whole thing with the impeachment of Trump as more just example of partisan politics, where the Democrats were looking to go and get him, and the Republican Party were never going to find him guilty. So you can question the level of evidence on either side on that one, depending on your point of view, is whether this is a witch up by the Democrats or whether this is a stitch up by the Republicans who let off a clearly guilty president. And again, the problem with all of this is it's all been shrouded in the huge amount of partisanship. The Congress has the right to confirm a new VP. This is only one who's appointed, not one who's elected. It's only been used twice, ironically 2 years in a row, 1973 and 1974. Congress has the right to declare war. It seems like a really important power, but it was last used in 1941, and every time I mention this, I say, well, you might notice America's been to war quite a few times since then, and so that doesn't seem that significant a power anymore. In the case of a deadlock in the Electoral College, then the two houses of Congress play very important roles in selecting the president and the vice president. But again, this has only been used twice, all the way back in 1800 and 1824, and you might recognise one of those if you're a big fan of Hamilton. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that's given you an idea of some of the key debates over Congress. Again, this video really fits in with the previous ones I've done over the three major functions in terms of oversight, legislation, and representation. So it's worth looking back over the other congressional videos as well. As I said earlier, this is going to be part of my series in which I'm going to try and cover the whole of the A-level specification. And so hopefully this will help you with your studies, help you with your revision, and put you in a really good place going into those exams eventually. Or if you're just watching this to gain a greater understanding of American politics, I hope this has been helpful to you. Any comments, please leave below. If you've enjoyed it, please hit like. If you haven't done already, please subscribe and get notifications as more videos are added. Thank you very much.